Joining us now, let's talk about the legality. If the president does decide to go this route and declare a national emergency or bring in the Pentagon or the Army Corps of Engineers, does he have the legal authority to do so? Will it be challenged? Jay Sekulow is with us, Chief Counsel for the American Center for Law and Justice, also counsel to the president. How are you, sir?
I'm doing great, John.
All right, so let's go. If the president decides to go this route, I see I don't see any legal obstacle. Even Democrats are acknowledging, some of them at least, that the president has the authority to do this. If you want to go to the specific law that, we can go to, we can mention the specific law in this particular case because he has a right to do it.
So look, the president has both statutorily has the right to do it, and that is Congress created the National Emergencies Act. So he has that. But he also has the authority under the Constitution of the United States as president. So he has both constitutional authority and statutory authority, that is legislation that was passed authorizing actions in the event of what is deemed by the president to be a national emergency. Now, by the way, some people are trying to conflate this with an act of war. That's not what it's about. It's not about an act of war. It's a national emergency. For instance, President Clinton in 1995 issued a national emergency declaration because of drug cartels coming and dealing with the heroin epidemic. And he issued the Colombian drug cartels. He issued a national directive on that national emergency declaration so that he could take specific action. You mentioned the funding of this. And as you said, for instance, the Army Corps of Engineers has at least $5 billion in discretionary funds for what's called
they actually have approximately $13.9 billion available from congressionally approved monies from February 2018 in the supplemental spending bill.
That's in addition to the $5 billion they have under the Discretionary Act for Civil Expenditures. So it's not look, this has never been about the money. What is this about? Those that are opposing the president on this do not want the president to have a win. Look what he's offered. He's offered to negotiate. They don't want to negotiate. He has talked about comprehensive immigration reform. They don't want to talk about comprehensive immigration reform. He's talked about, the thing with Jim Acosta yesterday at CNN. He goes to the water. He says, I'm at the border. I'm at the wall. There's a steel slotted fence here like the president wants.
Yeah, nothing's happening.
It's calm and tranquil. Exactly.
I know.
Precisely. Right. Because there's protection. So I think look, from a legal standpoint, it's very clear that the president has the authority. Now, you asked in the interview with the president the question about what will happen. So will they challenge it? And the answer to that is, of course, they'll challenge it. The next question is what happens ultimately.
Well, let me slow you down here. They're going to challenge it, and they'll follow the typical left-wing route, which is to go judge shopping, and that means the lawsuit will likely happen in Oregon or California. Yeah,
so they'll go to the Southern District of California. They'll go to Hawaii. They'll go to Oregon, like you said. They'll go to the Ninth Circuit. So you lose at the district court, you lose at the Court of Appeals, and you win at the Supreme Court, as we did with the case involving the travel restrictions that were imposed on the 6 targeted countries.
Well, if it's a national emergency, can there be an expedited process? Because how long is that going to take, what you just described?
I think actually, I mean, I know that my perspective on it is this. This is a question of law, not a question of fact. So it should move very rapidly through. I think you could see this happen in months. And here's the real legal question. This is what people need to understand. What is the legal question here? The legal question is not whether the president deems there to be a national emergency. That's his decision as president. So the legal question is, can a judge, and this is what really would happen, can a judge say, I don't think there's an emergency, I being the court, the judge, thus the president doesn't have the authority to act. And I think that's an overwhelming majority of the Supreme Court saying a judge cannot impose his authority over the president's, especially as it relates to both constitutional and specific statutory construction, where the statute says the president has this authority. A judge cannot say, well, my view is the president got that wrong.
So
I just don't see how on that issue.
So the president constitutionally and statutorily has the ability to do this, correct? And you're referring to the National Emergencies Act of 76.
Right, exactly correct.
All right, explain. Now, constitutionally, he's the commander-in-chief. Now, if Americans are being killed in part because of vulnerability on our southern border, wouldn't that be part of his job as commander-in-chief to protect the southern border? And that would then also allow and free up the military not only to provide funds but to also be down on the border and protecting the border.
No, that's exactly correct. So if you look at the overall authority of the president as commander-in-chief, it is very clear that it encompasses those kind of situations. So that's why I say you both have a statutory right and a constitutional right. Now, the fact is that you may not even have to get to that because the statute's so clear, but clearly the constitutional right is inherent in the president's authority as president of the United States. And a judge cannot impose his view of what the determination is over the president's. Does the judge get to make the determination of what's a national emergency, or does the president? And the statute says the president, and the Constitution says the president.
Well, it's not going to stop liberal activist judges. What if it's a national emergency that the president declares? Why wouldn't this go straight to the Supreme Court? Isn't there a path that they could?
There's not original jurisdiction. So there's not original jurisdiction in that situation. But do you know how many items of law give the president the authority in the time of a national emergency existing on the books? Over 470 provisions of federal law. So this is a well-established right that a president has. So that's why I think it would move very quickly through the courts.
So that would mean that there would be an obligation at the lower courts, going to the Ninth Circuit, going then to the Supreme Court, because it's in this category of a national emergency. They have a duty and obligation where they can't sit on it for a year before they decide the case.
I think that's exactly correct. And there's another issue here, too, and that is not just the issue of the judge imposing his view or her view of what the law, whether there's a national emergency or not. It's not people are conflating this. National emergency means it's like an act of war. That's not what it means. A national emergency is defined differently. And when President Clinton did it for drug cartels out of Colombia, if it was good in 1995, it would be good now. I mean, no question that the president there's precedent not only in the law, but in fact on this. And when I say in fact, what I'm meaning is other presidents have exercised this authority in similar situations. So this is not unprecedented.
So we had Newt Gingrich on earlier. Newt's position is that the president's in a much better political position to keep the shutdown going. And I said to him, well, if you watch every single other cable network except for Hannity, on Fox, what you're hearing are the difficulties, and I'm sure it is difficult for some of these furloughed employees. For them, they've got to pay their rent, they got to pay their mortgage, they got to pay for their cars. All of that money will eventually make its way back into their bank accounts, but it has inconvenienced them and worried them at a pretty high level. But he thinks it is a much better way to go than to declare the national emergency.
Well, I mean, here's the. Look, that's a political question, and I respect Newt Gingrich, former Speaker's judgment on that. I think, look, the president has the authority to do this. Does that get the people back to work? That's all. By the way, if he declares a national emergency, does it mean that that you've reached this impasse now and the government's funded? It doesn't mean that now the president can say, we will now move forward on that because I've taken action since Congress would not. But that would be a decision that the president would make. The political consequences of this. Look, I'm sympathetic for the people that have been furloughed. I mean, who wouldn't be? You have to be.
Oh, and I want them all to get.
Look where it came from.
That's a good point. But, in a situation where you got a Democratic Party that just 5 years ago was sounding just like Donald Trump. And that means Biden and Obama and Clinton and Schumer and all of them. And we played those tapes over and over again. And then to take this stand here and to be so insulting when the president offers a meeting to solve the problem with the vice president, they send their aides. Or when Nancy Pelosi flippantly says, I'll give you $1. They were not serious about ever solving the issue. Is it just that they don't want Donald Trump to get the job done that they obviously couldn't get done?
Yeah, no question about it. Look, I mean, if you look at this historically, and I have, every time there's been a real discussion of immigration reform, Sean, under a Republican, the Democrats have blocked it. Let's remember what George Bush tried to do, right? What Ronald Reagan tried to do, others. So here's what the president puts out in the last few days. We could get comprehensive immigration reform. The last thing they want is comprehensive immigration reform done under the watch of Donald Trump. I mean, let's be realistic, because let's talk about the money we're dealing with here. $5 billion is less than 0.1% of our budget. Less than 0.1% of our budget. $25 billion doesn't even reach, I think it's 0.4% of of 1%, 0.4 of 1%, like a little more than 0.5% of our budget. So this is not about the money. This has become an ideological battle between the left and the right, between the Republicans and the Democrats, however you want to describe it, over not the money, but a philosophical issue of they don't want this president to have this win.
Well, that's sad because in the meantime, we saw what has happened in just the last 2 weeks with Officer Singh, who, by the way, will be on Hannity tonight, and Pierce Corcoran, his mom and dad, will be on the program tonight. And we're going to meet other angel moms and dads, and they'll tell their story. And I bet they have some strong words and thoughts about the whole concept and the whole idea that this is a manufactured crisis, because it's not. But I got to take a break. We'll come back. We'll have more with Jay Sekulow coming up on the other side of the break. And as we continue with Jay Sekulow, Chief Counsel of the American Center for Law and Justice, also counsel to the president. All right, so the president now is his hand, in a sense, he's got to make a decision. And what I'm hearing from my sources on Capitol Hill is the president's going to give them a deadline. Maybe it's up to the State of the Union address. Maybe it's 2 weeks, 3 weeks, whatever. And if Congress fails to act, then he will declare the state of emergency, which, you know, having been down there 13 times, Jay, and having seen the drugs, the porous borders, gang members arrested in front of me, and also talking over the years to many of these angel moms and dads. Let me tell you, every American should watch Hannity tonight and then decide for yourself if this is a manufactured crisis, as they say. But how long would it take getting through the courts, assuming they go to California, assuming they go to the Ninth Circuit, how long till it gets its way to the Supreme Court?
I think it can move rapidly. I mean, I think the government can ask for expedited review at every step. In other words, don't just wait for when it gets to the Supreme Court. Expedited review at the district court. Expedited review at the Ninth Circuit Court of Appeals. I mean, I've done cases where it's gone from, the district court to the Supreme Court in 2 months, in 8 weeks. So it can happen. I mean, I've had cases where I've taken a stay up to the Supreme Court from a decision in a day.
Right.
So there are ways to move the case forward. Clearly.
But you do know they'll judge shop it.
Oh, absolutely.
I mean, you got to wonder if maybe it would be better if the Republicans, they filed the suit in a more friendly venue first. Let them do it.
Well, I mean, they're going to file a lawsuit as soon as if the president takes action, they are going to file a lawsuit. And that lawsuit will be filed in a sympathetic jurisdiction, which means someplace probably in California. And in that case, and in that scenario, what I think will happen is we're going to have to just aggressively move for review.
And so you
just got to get it up. You got to get it upstairs to the Supreme Court as quick as you can.
Yeah. And how long would an expedited review normally take?
I think you could do an expedited review, properly pled, could be done in a couple of months. It could be pretty quick. And it could even go quicker if they. It depends on how the government were to present it.
If we get to actual real judges that aren't judicial activists, I can't see this losing in the Supreme Court. Jay Sekulow, Chief Counsel, American Center for Law and Justice, also counsel to the president. Thank you, Jay, for being with us.